Chapter 13. The question had an effect on Tempest that was apparent to Peacemaker. Before he asked her about Adder, she had been groggy, her eyes barely open. Then he asked the question, and her eyes opened wide, as if she had gained a sudden burst of energy. Tempest now looked at him with curiosity and excitement as she analyzed whether or not he was serious. But Peacemaker did not relent. He wanted to know more about what he had seen in his dream, if it held any grain of truth. When Tempest appeared convinced, she stood up from her sleeping platform. "Common cave," Tempest whispered. Slowly, she gestured towards Ermine, who still slept soundly. Nodding, Peacemaker quietly walked out of the sleeping cave and back to the common cave with Tempest following close behind him. When they were a distance from the cave, Peacemaker felt Tempest grab his forearm with her talons tightly. Looking back at the sea wing, Peacemaker saw that Tempest's stare had become much more aggressive. She still appeared excited, but she was acting like Peacemaker was a fish that would get away from her. "Tell me," Tempest said, taking a step towards him. "Tell me everything." "What?" Peacemaker asked, blinking in confusion. Tell her what? He was asking her first. "What makes you think Adder was a somnus?" Tempest continued, her tone sounding impatient. "Why would you ask a question like that, without knowledge before Talon?" The way she spoke, and her expression growing increasingly agitated the more he stalled, the more intimidated he grew of Tempest. He'd never seen her get this way, at least around him. It scared him, to the point he wanted to yank away from her and call for help. He started to wonder if the dragon in front of him was even Tempest. But when her gaze fell to her talons that gripped his forearm, Tempest's eyes widened in horror. Looking up at him, her eyes softened. "Peacemaker," Tempest whispered as she released her talons and stared down at them. I'm sorry." Despite her apology, Peacemaker backed away from Tempest, unsure if she truly was sorry or not. For the longest time, Tempest had been a friend Peacemaker felt safe around, second only to Cliff. For her to suddenly become this aggressive? He no longer felt that security. "What was that for?" Peacemaker whispered, harshly, maybe harsher than he was normally comfortable with. Tempest did not reply, her eyes still looking at the ground with a regretful gaze. "Being a somnus has its burden," Tempest answered. "Adder has been my family's greatest burden." "What are you talking about?" Peacemaker asked, trying to relax. He wanted to understand, but after how Tempest had treated him, now his patience was short. But Tempest had been his friend since the start of the term. He needed to be patient, for her. Tempest walked towards one of the seating cushions near the fire pit and plopped down onto it. Peacemaker, after a moment of contemplation on what he should do, decided to sit down beside her. Whatever it was that was on her mind, it weighed on her. Whereas she had been excited one moment, all that energy had gone. For several minutes, the two sat together with Peacemaker waiting for Tempest to finally speak. Taking a deep breath, Tempest looked at Peacemaker. "He was a somnus," Tempest said, finally answering Peacemaker's earlier question. "In fact, he was likely the first somnus. Or, the first somnus to become aware of his abilities anyways." "What do you mean?" Peacemaker asked. "Discovering if you are a somnus is much harder than discovering if one is an animus," Tempest explained. "A somnus can only discover their abilities in the dream world. To do this, they cannot just become aware they are dreaming. They need to gain complete control over their dream, and reveal the dream world itself." "Adder was the first to realize this?" Peacemaker wondered, and Tempest nodded. "He used his powers to protect Queen Anaconda and benefit the Rainwing tribe," Tempest explained. "So, in a way, he did have powers, Peacemaker said, thinking back to Jaguar finding the book that claimed that King Adder had mind-reading powers. Not like Nightwing's, but yes, Tempest said. Slowly, she held out her talons toward Peacemaker's. Despite what had happened not too long ago, Peacemaker allowed her to touch him. Peacemaker, I'm sorry about what I did, but I need to know, what made you ask about Adder? She had answered some of his questions. The least he could do was answer her. I had a dream, Peacemaker muttered, recalling the dream he had had not too long ago. The dream was easy to remember. Thinking back on it was almost like recalling a memory. Everything felt so real. I was with a Nightwing, leading him towards a clearing. Peacemaker began his recollection. Then Adder appeared, and we conversed. Then I felt tired, in the dream, and he revealed his name. What did he look like? Tempest asked. He remembered Adder's scale patterns, the brown, diamond-like shapes that went along his spine. Red, with a diamond-like pattern of scales, Peacemaker whispered, and Tempest nodded. That was him. He was the only Rainwing to have that pattern, Tempest muttered. But I don't understand why you would have a dream of Adder. I barely even have dreams of him. This made Peacemaker curious. Why would you have a dream of Adder? Peacemaker asked, raising a brow. Tempest's gaze became hesitant. She seemed deeply conflicted at hearing his question now. The way she acted almost made Peacemaker think the question he had asked her required her to give a forbidden answer. But, given the secrets she had kept from him and the rest of the Winglet, he imagined that maybe it was the case. If it was, then he would not pry. Before he could speak, Tempest's talons gently wrapped around his own. Her green eyes gazed into his. You have a right to know, Peacemaker, she said as she slowly stood up and walked over towards the cave wall, looking at a map of Pyria. Taking a deep breath, she finally spoke. From my father's bloodline, we can trace our lineage back to the first Somnus. Peacemaker's eyes widened upon hearing this. You're a descendant of... Peacemaker began, amazed. Of King Adder, Tempest finished, turning back to face him. My family is descended from Prince Summer, Adder and Anaconda's son. You're part Rainwing? Peacemaker asked, trying to keep his voice at a whisper, not wanting to wake the rest of the Winglet. Squinting his eyes, Peacemaker tried to get a closer look to see if she had any Rainwing traits. Hearing his question and seeing him examine her, Tempest chuckled, followed by a shake of her head. No, Tempest answered, walking back to the center of the cave. The Rainwing blood in us was bred out at least 1,900 years ago. I'm full Seawing. All of what was said made sense to Peacemaker. Tempest's sudden interest in Adder and her knowledge of him all made sense, as she was descended from King Adder. The fact she was a Somnus, and Adder had been a Somnus, was also a link that was no coincidence. Your outburst, Peacemaker said, thinking back to not too long ago. You said your family has a burden? Specifically Adder? Let's just say Adder made some decisions that have affected my family 2,000 years later, Tempest admitted. It's affected my father, more specifically. Eventually, it's going to be my burden. Whatever that burden had been, that was what had to be dragging on Tempest's mind. It explained her behavior when he had mentioned Adder. What kind of burden is it? Peacemaker asked. The Seawing did not answer. Instead, she looked away from him. Tempest, what is it that you will have to do? Tempest showed no inclination of looking at him. However, she spoke. "You don't know it, Peacemaker," Tempest said, her voice barely a whisper. "But you have helped my family." "How?" Peacemaker asked, trying to make sense of what she was saying. He failed to see what he had done by just having a dream of their ancestor. Finally, Tempest looked back at him and gave him the most sincere smile she had given him in the time he knew her. "You've given us hope," Tempest answered. This answer did not satisfy Peacemaker. Yet Tempest's expression confirmed to him that she was not lying. Her green eyes had brightened in a way as if her wings had been unbound after being weighed down by weights for years. Whatever his dream was supposed to mean, it had helped Tempest and her family in some form. Before he could further question her, the loud ringing of the gong startled Peacemaker. Looking towards the window, he'd seen that the sun had begun to rise, confirming that it was nearing time to start the day. Soon, the rest of the Quartz Winglet would step out of their sleeping caves and go through their morning rituals. However, something happened that hadn't occurred yet during the entire term. The first blast of the gong was quickly followed by a second, loud blast. Peacemaker's eyes looked towards Tempest, who looked back at him with confusion. The morning always started off with a single ring of the gong. A second was always followed an hour later, confirming that students worked to get to their classes. 5 minutes later, the gong would ring again to announce classes were in session. But 2 rings of the gong in quick succession? It was a signal to all students to gather in the gathering cave, where teachers were to give an announcement. This was far into the year. The only announcement that they'd ever gotten had been during orientation day. But, until today, the teachers had nothing major to report to the students. What could the teachers have to say this morning? "Seriously? This morning?" came Cliff's voice as he and Jaguar were coming into the common cave, the latter yawning tiredly. Alligator and Hyena were the next to step into the common cave, with Ermine entering last. The 3 dragons were just as curious as the others. "Well, we aren't going to find out in here," Hyena muttered, one wing touching Alligator's as she did. "Hopefully, it's actually important," Ermine sighed as she walked towards the exit of the cave. Glancing back to the winglet, she raised a brow. "Coming?" None in the winglet answered the Icewing, but silently agreed with her by following her out of the cave. Peacemaker waited until most of the winglet had left the cave before joining Cliff. Walking side by side with Cliff, the Skywing Prince leaned close and whispered to Peacemaker. "Work all night?" Cliff asked. "Yeah," Peacemaker admitted. He'd not intended that, especially with how his and Tempest's conversation went. "I fell asleep in the common cave." "You sleep long enough, though, Peace?" Cliff asked. "I guess," Peacemaker said. He hoped so, as he did not want to fall asleep in class. He was awake now, and did not feel fatigue. So he should be well, right? Cliff, at least, was satisfied with his answer. Conversations between the winglet were cut short as they were joined by the copper and gold winglets. With 3 winglets walking down the same hall, things became crowded, causing Peacemaker to lose track of his winglet. Eventually, he bumped into another Nightwing. Said Nightwing just so happened to be Shadehunter. "Whoops," Shadehunter said as she looked over at him. "Oh, Peacemaker. Sorry about that." "No, my fault," Peacemaker said sheepishly. "Just crowded." "Tell me about it," Shadehunter muttered. "What do you think the teachers want to talk to us about?" Peacemaker shrugged his wings. "Hopefully nothing bad." Peacemaker thought aloud, much to Shadehunter's agreement. "How are you doing, though?" Shadehunter asked him. "Haven't had the chance to talk to you in a while." Peacemaker smiled at hearing this. He appreciated that she liked to talk to him. While he would not say he was close to her as he was with his winglet, he did enjoy talking to her. She was kind and always listened to others before giving her opinion. "Just been busy, you know," Peacemaker replied. "Webb's class?" Shadehunter asked. "And Professor Longhorn," Peacemaker added. "Numbers. And more numbers," Shadehunter finished for him, causing Bull to laugh at this. The two's conversation repeatedly veered into a number of different conversations. Eventually, however, the conversations came to an end as the three winglets arrived at the gathering cave. Bidding Shadehunter farewell, Peacemaker quickly joined his winglet and moved to stand beside Cliff. As he did so, however, he felt something tug on him in the back of his mind. Something urging him to go back after Shadehunter, urging him to stand beside her. "Spend some time with her," he heard his mind whisper to him, the sound of the voice reminding him of Moon. Despite this, Peacemaker internally refused. He liked Shadehunter, but he was going to be with his winglet. He was going to stand with Cliff, his best friend. Standing beside Cliff, Peacemaker felt his head feel light for a moment. But when Cliff looked at him and smiled, he felt the lightness in his head become more tolerable. After all, he was with his friends. When all of the winglets had assembled in the cave, Peacemaker saw the 15 Academy teachers step forward. Tsunami and Sunny in particular were the source of attention. Based on Sunny's expression, Peacemaker had a feeling the announcement was serious. How serious? That would depend. "Good morning, everyone," Sunny said, gaining every student's undivided attention. When silence dominated the cave, the Sandwing continued. "We are sorry for the early morning gathering. I promise, this will be short." Sunny glanced over towards the Silver Winglet members, all 6 glancing at each other when they realized that Sunny's attention was on them. After a moment of silence, Sunny continued. "We have news on Gull, and where he has been for the last few days." This caused mutters around the cave. When he heard this, Peacemaker was not sure how he felt about learning where Gull had been. On one Talon, he was relieved that he had been found. On the other Talon, he had hurt Tempest and Alligator. That was something he would not forgive him over. "Hopefully, he's here," Cliff growled behind clenched teeth. Peacemaker glanced at his friend and saw the Skywing Prince's red eyes show hints of fury. "I have a few things to say to that pile of scavenger dung." "Cliff!" Ermine hissed. As Cliff turned to glare at Ermine, she slowly edged away, giving Cliff a view of Alligator. Alligator appeared uncomfortable, his gaze at the ground. Peacemaker could only imagine what he was thinking. Beside the Mudwing, Hyena brushed her wing against his, while Tempest, to his left, placed her talons over his shoulder. Cliff slowly closed his mouth, but glanced at Peacemaker. To assure his friend, Peacemaker gave him a smile. It was less about showing happiness, and more to cause some ease among his winglet. "I understand he has upset some of you." Sunny spoke again, gaining everyone's attention again. Clearly, she was speaking to the court's winglet, in particular. "But the news we have to share is quite serious." Glancing at Tsunami, Sunny stepped back. When she had joined the teachers, Peacemaker saw Winter and Starflight place a wing over her. She looked at each of them and gave them a smile. What had happened to Gull? Peacemaker wondered to himself. Tsunami was the one to answer that question for the entire school. "Last night, we received a letter from a Sandwing and Icewing patrol along the border of the Ice and Sand Kingdoms," Tsunami explained. "The Icewing patrol had discovered someone wandering in the snow aimlessly." After a pause, Tsunami sighed and continued. "Gull was found, almost frozen in the snow." Upon hearing this, there were gasps and mutters from every class. The Silver Winglet all stared up at Tsunami with wide eyes, visibly concerned for their member. To every Sea Wing, even Tempest, Peacemaker saw that they were shocked and winced painfully. Sea wings, despite being an aquatic dragon species, preferred an environment that was tropical and warm, just like the Sea Kingdom. If a sea wing was caught in a massive blizzard, unprepared, then they would become sluggish. No amount of water in a cold environment could prevent this. From what Tempest told Peacemaker and the others, severe cold was the second greatest fear of the sea wings, falling behind dehydration. Why Gull would end up in the Ice Kingdom was confusing to everyone in the cave. Meanwhile, as he thought more about Gull being in the Ice Kingdom, Peacemaker suspected why Gull would be there. Peacemaker remembered what he had told Gull during the altercation. "Just do as you're told and shut up. Get out of our way, leave us alone, and cool off." That's what he'd yelled at Gull back when he hurt Alligator and Tempest, only to be followed by a thought from Peacemaker that he had not spoken out loud. Peacemaker had hoped Gull would cool off in the Ice Kingdom. Realizing all of this, Peacemaker felt the surprise in him grow, but it was not out of guilt. He was surprised because he actually found Gull being in the Ice Kingdom funny. Funny to the point Peacemaker wanted to laugh out loud in the middle of the cave. He wanted to mock Gull. No care in the world that the sea wing was hurt, possibly on death's door. This made Peacemaker sick inside. He wanted to throw up. "Gull is recovering in the Sea Kingdom. He will make a full recovery, according to the healers," Tsunami explained. As a few sighs of relief echoed in the cave, Peacemaker felt the laugh unwillingly trying to erupt from his throat, only to be replaced with another feeling that made Peacemaker sick. He felt disappointed that Gull did not die. Peacemaker's head began to feel dizzy, as if the cave itself was spinning. Why? Why was he feeling this? Why did he wish Gull ill? He hated what he did to Alligator and Tempest, but he never wished him harm. Yet here he was, something inside of him hoping Gull would suffer. He needed to leave. He needed to get outside. Slowly, Peacemaker backed away from his winglet. When he was a good distance, Peacemaker hurriedly turned for the exit, in the middle of Tsunami discussing that another sea wing would be taking Gull's place in the silver winglet. "Peacemaker?" he heard Cliff whisper. But Peacemaker did not turn back, instead quickly sneaking out of the cave. When he was out, Peacemaker broke into a run as he ran through the halls, all the while the floors started to turn and shift as the dizziness intensified. Eventually, he found one of the academy's entrances and rushed out of it into the cold morning air. With effort, Peacemaker walked towards the cliff ledge and collapsed to the ground, lowering his head to look down at the ground hundreds of feet below him. The dizziness refused to subside. Peacemaker dug his talons into his head. "Stop!" Peacemaker moaned. "Stop!" But the dizziness did not stop. The laughter threatened to overcome him, and the more he resisted the urge to laugh, the more he felt sick. Unfurling his wings, Peacemaker took to the sky, flying for the forested area near the mountain. He needed aid. He needed to be alone. As he flew, Peacemaker felt his wings suddenly grow exhausted, as if they were weighed down by chains. Unwillingly, he found himself descending towards the forest, eventually landing roughly into the dirt. As he lay on the ground, Peacemaker could not find the will to stand, only feeling sick. Then he laughed. He laughed hard, so much it echoed across the trees. Tears filled Peacemaker's eyes the more he laughed. He felt like he wanted to tear himself apart. He could not find out why he was laughing. Why was he laughing about someone suffering? Something was wrong, but he didn't know what. As he lay on the ground, crying and laughing. Peacemaker felt someone touch his shoulders. "Peacemaker," he heard a voice say. "What's wrong?" Slowly, Peacemaker looked up at the owner of the voice, seeing a sea-wing standing beside him, looking down at him with concerned, emerald-colored eyes. Peacemaker's eyes widened as he stared at the sea-wing's green scales and eyes. Somehow, he knew this dragon. He'd seen him before. Him. All of a sudden, the laughter and sobbing ceased, only to be replaced with a roar of fury from Peacemaker himself. Swiftly, Peacemaker got to his feet, shocking the sea-wing at how fast he moved. "You!" Peacemaker hissed, giving in to the rage he felt. He did not know this dragon, but seeing his face filled him with unbridled rage. "You turned her against me!" "Peacemaker?" the sea-wing asked cautiously as Peacemaker crouched down. Then, Peacemaker pounced, talons extending. "I'll kill you!" Peacemaker screamed, tackling the sea-wing. "I'll kill you!" "Stop!" the sea-wing shouted, looking up at Peacemaker with fear. Yet, the sea-wing did not raise his talons to defend himself, instead raising his wings to shield himself from Peacemaker. Seeing the fear in the sea-wing's eyes filled Peacemaker with unexplained satisfaction. All he had to do was reach the sea-wing's throat. "Stop!" a new voice shouted from behind Peacemaker. "Peacemaker! I said stop!" Talons touched Peacemaker's shoulder, causing him to snap his eyes away from the sea-wing, over to the new arrival. Suddenly, Peacemaker felt his blood run cold. Beside him was a beautiful Nightwing. She had scales that resembled the night sky. Violet-colored eyes stared into Peacemaker's eyes, pleadingly. Slowly, the Nightwing raised her talons up to Peacemaker's cheek. "Peacemaker! You're hurting him!" the Nightwing said, leaning forward. "Peacemaker!" "Goodbye, my dearest love." "Traitor!" Peacemaker screamed at the Nightwing, releasing the sea-wing and turning all of his fury on her as her eyes widened in horror. Before he could grab her, the sea-wing sidestepped out of his way. Spinning around, Peacemaker looked back at both dragons with hatred. He would kill them both. "Dismiss!" the Nightwing shouted. Peacemaker, not caring what she was saying, stepped forward, slowly. As he drew closer, Peacemaker felt satisfied with the fear he instilled in the dragons before him. The satisfaction that they were at his mercy. Preparing to pounce, Peacemaker was ready to claw the life from them both. "Brother!" Peacemaker felt his entire body grow cold when he heard the voice. It was foreign to him, yet it sounded familiar. Looking behind him, the forest around him had vanished. Now he was in a house, a living room that caused his eyes to water as a flood of emotions filled his mind. Grinding his teeth, Peacemaker spun back around to stare at the Nightwing and Sea-Wing, only to find a new dragon entirely. A female Nightwing, with white markings. She sat before him, looking at him with her pale blue eyes. Seeing her, Peacemaker felt the rage inside of him begin to dissipate. What had he been doing? Why had he attacked the two dragons? As the rage became non-existent, Peacemaker felt his body grow tired, almost all of his strength leaving him. The clicking of talons against the stone floor drew closer as the Nightwing wrapped her wings around him. Peacemaker felt his eyes water as she pulled him into a hug. Without thinking, he wrapped his wings around her, sobbing into her. "Don't leave me," Peacemaker sobbed as he hugged the Nightwing. "Don't leave me behind." "I haven't," the Nightwing whispered, pulling away from him. Slowly she smiled. The The ocean in the sky. The keepers. Before he could question what she was talking about, the Nightwing leaned forward, pressing her lips against his forehead. Our heart pieces will be whole, brother. Dismiss! A brilliant light filled the Peacemaker's vision as he felt himself fall to the ground, crumbling into the dirt. Peacemaker! He heard someone shout, followed by Talons shaking his shoulder. Please, wake up! Slowly, Peacemaker opened his eyes, staring up at blurry figures in front of him. One green, one red. The voices he recognized. Cliff? Peacemaker moaned, his head feeling like it had been struck with a log. Tempest? 3 moons, he heard Cliff say, all the while pacing back and forth. Not long after, Peacemaker's vision became clear, and he saw Tempest sitting in front of him, her aqua-green eyes looking at him with clear signs of relief. Peacemaker, Tempest said, twining her tail around his. How are you? Peacemaker shook his head, all the while rubbing it. His head felt like his brain had been ripped out of it, only to be put back in. Head hurts, he admitted, all the while looking around the woods. Not far was Cliff approaching him, giving him a relieved expression. When Peacemaker looked around some more, he couldn't find the other dragons he had attacked. Why had he gotten so furious after seeing them both? Where is the Sea-Wing and Nightwing? After asking the questions, Cliff and Tempest looked at each other with confusion. Peacemaker? What are you talking about? Cliff asked, raising a brow. Looking down, Peacemaker sighed, the guilt washing over him at the thought of attacking 2 dragons he did not even know. I attacked a Nightwing and a Sea-Wing, but I don't know why, Peacemaker revealed. Saying this, he saw even more confusion from Cliff. Peacemaker, Cliff said, sitting down in front of him. Only Tempest and I were here with you. What? Peacemaker asked, confused, until realization began to dawn on him. The Sea-Wing's voice. It had sounded familiar. Too familiar. The more he thought about it, the more he felt his body grow cold as he realized how the Sea-Wing's voice had been familiar. The voice? It had been Cliff's. The Nightwing's voice? It had been Tempest's. 3 moons. Peacemaker looked up at Cliff and Tempest, both looking away from him as he came to the realization on his own. The realization that he had not only attacked 2 dragons, he had tried to kill Cliff and Tempest. Peacemaker, just let me talk. I tried to kill you both, Peacemaker shouted at Tempest as he paced uncontrollably along the river shoreline that passed through the woods. Millions of thoughts ran through his head, all of them about what he could have done to Cliff and Tempest. All of these thoughts involving blood on his talons. Peacemaker, you just weren't... Cliff attempted to interject, only for Peacemaker to interrupt. No, I knew what I was doing, Peacemaker snapped, tears threatening to overwhelm him as he glared at the Skywing, who attempted to get him to sit down in the grass. I almost killed you! The idea that his talons nearly killed Cliff and Tempest broke Peacemaker's heart. Never, in the time he knew Cliff, had he imagined the idea that he would try to kill the Skywing. Never. Cliff was his best friend, who may not even be his best friend anymore. Peacemaker wouldn't blame him if that were the case. Cliff would be in his right to abandon him and never want to see him again. Yet, here Cliff was, trying to calm him. That was what made Peacemaker angry. His friend did not hate him for what he had almost done. "It wasn't you," Tempest said, causing both Peacemaker and Cliff to look at her. Her green eyes looking at Peacemaker with no anger, only concern. "Something had a hold of you." What?" Peacemaker asked, his voice just barely a whisper, as he tried to comprehend what she was talking about. "Something from the dream realm," Tempest clarified. "I felt it when I was close to you." Peacemaker felt his talons go to his head, confusion riveting through his skull. Had something really been controlling him? Enough to make him hurt his friends? Would it happen again? Were his friends safe to be around him? "Last night, you said the words were working!" Cliff snapped at Tempest, walking closer to the Sea Wing. "Now you're saying they aren't?" "Whatever is happening," Tempest responded, standing up to meet Cliff's glare with a fierce one of her own. "It is more than what the wards are meant to repel. These are not dreams, Cliff. Whatever is happening, however, is coming from the realm of dreams." "So? What was it then?" Cliff yelled. "I don't know," Tempest snapped, baring her teeth at Cliff as he got dangerously close to her. "I don't know everything." "Well, you better figure out what's going on," Cliff growled. His glare became even harsher. "Stop! Both of you!" Peacemaker yelled, causing both Cliff and Tempest to flinch at the raise in his voice. After what had happened, he refused to let his friends attack each other over something he had done. They should be angry with him, the one who had attacked them both. "I refuse to watch you both tear each other apart," Peacemaker said, walking towards them. "Not after what I did." Slowly, both Tempest and Cliff visibly relaxed after hearing him speak. While they had both calmed down, neither was willing to look at each other for a moment. "I don't know what happened," Tempest muttered as she looked back to Peacemaker. "But as I said, you weren't yourself." "Will it happen again?" Peacemaker asked, scared at the idea of attacking Cliff and Tempest, hurting them again. Tempest looked away. Even if she did not say anything, her answer was clear as day. She did not know that either. Instead, she came close and draped a wing over him. "I don't know what is happening to you, Peacemaker, but I think I have a solution. But it's risky," Tempest said. This caused Peacemaker's head to perk up. "What solution?" he asked, feeling hopeful. "By both of us going into the dream world," Tempest answered. Peacemaker's eyes widened upon hearing this. At first, when Tempest told him and the rest of the winglet about the dream world, he never thought of it as a place he could go. At least, not in the same way as Tempest. Now, however, he could not describe what he accurately felt. Maybe excitement? Definitely fear. Tempest had spoken about the dream world back when she first set up the wards. He remembered her telling about potential dangers that inhabited the dream world, entities that could influence the dreams and minds of dragons. What would happen if they encountered such creatures if they were going to it themselves? "So, you're going to do what?" Cliff said, walking towards Tempest, a stern gaze on his face. "You're going to open a magical portal and simply bring him with you?" As he said this, he held up his talons and mimicked a stage magician pretending to cast magic in a mocking gesture. "No," Tempest answered, visibly resisting the urge to yell. "I'll do so by entering his dreams and take him with me into the dream world itself." Cliff scowled at Tempest. But Peacemaker, while he was uncertain of the idea, entering dream world, a place he did not know what was like, it scared him even, However, the idea of attacking his friends again scared him more. If there was a way, he would take it. "Okay," Cliff said, before Cliff could say more. "Let's do it." Cliff's eyes widened when he heard this, and looked at Peacemaker with alarm. "Peacemaker?" "It's either this," Peacemaker interrupted, "or risk me hurting you, and all the people I care about." Peacemaker walked up to Cliff, standing in front of him and staring at him eye to eye. "If going into the dream world, whatever it may be, means stopping whatever happened to me from happening again, then I'm doing it." Peacemaker did not look away from Cliff, as the Skywing Prince gave him a skeptical stare. Normally, Peacemaker hated being confrontational, even now. But he was adamant in what he wanted to do. Cliff saw this. It seemed even he knew Peacemaker had no intention of backing down. "Fine," Cliff muttered as he looked back at Tempest. "But I'm coming too." Tempest raised a brow at Cliff, who added, "He's my best friend, and I'm not going to leave him alone with you in this dream world." At first, Peacemaker thought Tempest was going to huff at the request, until she nodded, though she seemed highly reluctant. "The more of us there are, will help me find a way to return to the waking world," Tempest responded as she began to walk away from the riverside that they stood by. As she walked in the direction of Jade Mountain, she paused and said, "We'll go into the dream world tonight, when it is easier for our minds to cross over. Until then, we go about our normal day." With that, Tempest unfurled her wings and took to the sky. When she was gone, Peacemaker looked at Cliff, who visibly relaxed from his frustration and anger towards Tempest. This silence, however, became uncomfortable for Peacemaker. All that could be heard between him and Cliff was the running of water beside them. Peacemaker did not know what to say after what he had done. Even if Cliff did not blame him, he did not know if he could face Cliff. "We'll figure this out," Cliff said, interrupting Peacemaker's thoughts. The Skywing Prince gave him a sympathetic gaze. "I promise you, Peacemaker." "Even if I hurt you and Tempest again?" Peacemaker muttered. He could not help it as his voice broke for a moment. I didn't." "Stop it," Cliff said, grabbing Peacemaker's shoulder with his talons. "Just stop it." Cliff's gaze hardened. "I don't care what you think you did. I don't really understand what Tempest is talking about. I don't trust her in everything, but I do trust what she told me. That what we saw, it wasn't you." Peacemaker tried to speak, but he struggled to counter Cliff, the friend who had been loyal to him since day one. "We can help you," Cliff continued. "We will help you." Looking into Cliff's red eyes, all Peacemaker could do was feel grateful for a friendship he felt he did not deserve. A friendship he would fight to keep. No words were shared between them, as both Peacemaker and Cliff flew back to the academy. As the two dragons returned to Jade Mountain, Peacemaker began to mentally prepare himself for the journey he would embark on that night, into the realm of dreams.